Welcome to the EPRS Chronicles in our second and final episode on the EU institutional cycle changed. In this installment, we will look at how the leadership of key EU institutions are chosen. For this, I am joined once more by Ralph Drachenberg, EPRS resident expert in the European Council. Hello again, Ralph.
Hello, Kelly.
Last time, Ralph, you gave us a fantastic analogy to understand how the cycles work within the EU leadership. Can you explain that to us one more time?
Yes, of course. In a nutshell, Kelly, it's about finding an example of what this moment of institutional change is. And if you imagine the EU as a computer, it's like updating every 5 years your hardware, which is the EU institutional leadership, and its software, which is the priorities. And we talked the last time about the priorities.
Well, this time we're going to talk about the hardware, the leadership of the European Union, and how this is chosen. But first, tell us what positions are up for renewal in this cycle.
This year, first of all, we have the European Commission President for renewal. We also have the European Council President. We have the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy for the European Union. And we have the European Parliament President for re-election. Another top job, which is this time not for re-election, is the European Central Bank's President, but this only takes place every 7 years, so that's why it's not taking place this time.
And how will all the other leaders be selected?
The other leaders are based on very different procedures specified in the treaty. So, for example, the only one who's being directly elected by the European Council is the European Council President. The European Commission President will only be nominated by the European Council and afterwards being elected by the European Parliament. The High Representative for Foreign Affairs is being appointed by the European Council in agreement afterwards with the President-elect of the European Commission, and then needs to be voted in together with the rest of the Commission by the European Parliament. And of course, the European Parliament's President is being elected directly by its MEPs and only by its MEPs, but they of course take into consideration the other positions and are not deciding this in a vacuum.
And regardless of the process for each of them, can you tell us what sort of criteria come into play when they are being selected?
Yes, some of those criteria are mentioned in the treaties, such as geographic balance. But also last time already President Tusk, the European Council President, mentioned that we should also take gender balance and political party balance in consideration. And if you actually look at the personalities that were selected the last time in 2019, we did a good job on gender balance. It was the first time that we had 2 female leaders in those high positions. On the balance between geography, we could have been doing better because most leaders were coming from Western and Southern Europe, not including other areas. And if you look at the party political dimension, it's quite interesting to see also development, because in the past, all positions were divided up between the European People's Party, the EPP, and the European Social Democrats, because they always had the majority both in the European Council and in the European Parliament. In 2019, the situation was different, because for the first time we had a very strong representation of liberal head of states of government in the European Council, and liberal parties did quite well in the European elections. So for that reason, Charles Michel was elected as a liberal representative for the European Council's presidency.
And let's talk a little bit about the Commission President, because that's a very important post as well. Once the European Council has nominated its pick for European Commission President, what is the interplay, or how did the election results of the European Parliament come into play?
Yes, it's actually a change over time, so it's an important point to remember. Before 2009, when we had the Lisbon Treaty, the EU heads of state of government could propose whoever they want. Now the treaties specify that the nomination should be including or considering the election results of the European Parliament. And that means normally that the Commission President will be from the party that has the strongest gains in the European elections.
But if political parties have such an important role, what do we do when there are coalition governments that have to have a say on one of these leadership positions?
This is a very important question, Kelly, because these days we have an increased number of coalition governments in Europe. Currently, we have over 20 leaders in the European Council which lead a multi-party coalition. forming a total of over 80 different national political parties. So you can imagine there's a lot of potential of disagreements, which then might reduce the liberty that a leader has in the European Council to make decisions. And a very practical, concrete example from 2019 was actually the election of Ursula, or the nomination of Ursula von der Leyen as Commission President. Because even her own compatriot, Angela Merkel, who hails from the same political party, was the only one who could not vote in favor of her to be nominated. And had to abstain. Why? Because her coalition partner, the Social Democrats at the time, were against supporting this candidature.
Okay. Thank you for that very important clarification. I think it's much clearer to us now how these elections are done. Let's talk about the current position we're in right now. Once the European Parliament elections are over, we will have the beginning of the new EU institutional cycle. So what happens next?
Directly after the European elections, we'll have a first gathering of EU leaders at early June, where they will, between themselves, debate the results of the European elections and see what their views are about which person should get which position. Afterwards, you have interinstitutional discussions, normally by the European Council President and the European Parliament President. And afterwards, we can expect normally to have a final proposal, a package of candidatures at the end of June, at the latest, the beginning of July.
Thank you very much for simplifying these very complex procedures, Ralph.
You're welcome, Kelly.
This concludes our two-part series on the EU institutional cycle change. For more insightful discussions, please follow the EPRS.